Joel Goldsmith discovered something so powerful in 1955 that he kept it secret from most students. He called it the invisible treatment, a method that dissolves any problem without effort, prayer, or mental work. This wasn't meditation or affirmation. This was pure consciousness recognizing its own infinite nature. The secret wasn't complex rituals or lengthy prayers. It was the realization that God's presence is already complete, already perfect, already here. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything, you align with what Joel called the already accomplished fact of spiritual perfection. Most students spent years learning complicated metaphysical treatments. Meanwhile, Joel used this invisible method to heal instantly. He would simply rest in the knowing that spirit is the only power, the only presence, the only reality. Nothing else exists to be healed or changed. Tonight you'll learn what Joel whispered only to his closest students. This invisible treatment that works while you sleep, while you work, while you live. The secret that transforms everything without you doing anything at all. Joel tested this invisible treatment on Sarah, a woman dying of cancer in 1956. Doctors gave her 3 weeks. Joel didn't pray for her healing. Instead, he rested in the spiritual truth that disease has no reality in God's perfect creation. He held the consciousness of wholeness. Within 10 days, Sarah's tumors began shrinking. The doctors called it spontaneous remission. Joel knew better. When consciousness recognizes only spirit's perfection, the illusion of disease simply dissolves. No struggle, no effort, no mental manipulation required. The invisible treatment works because it doesn't try to change anything. It recognizes what is already true. God is the only power, the only presence, the only life. When you rest in this truth, harmony appears automatically. Reality adjusts to match spiritual consciousness. Joel kept this secret because most people want to do something, fix something, heal something. But the invisible treatment does everything by doing nothing. It's the hardest teaching to accept and the most powerful to experience. In his private journals, Joel wrote that traditional prayer often reinforces the very problems we're trying to solve. When you pray for healing, you affirm that sickness is real. When you pray for money, you confirm lack exists. The invisible treatment does the opposite. Instead of asking God to change circumstances, you recognize that God's perfection is already expressing everywhere. You rest in the completed fact of harmony. You don't treat the problem. You rest in the solution that already exists in consciousness. Joel discovered that when you stop giving power to appearances and rest in spiritual reality, miracles happen naturally. The invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing its own completeness. No words needed, no time required, no effort involved. This is why some students experienced instant healing while others struggled for years. The ones who stopped trying and started resting in truth found immediate freedom. The invisible treatment works when nothing else does because it aligns with how spirit actually operates. The invisible treatment has 3 simple steps Joel never taught publicly. First, stop trying to change anything. Second, rest in the knowing that God's perfection is already complete. Third, watch as harmony appears without your effort or interference. Joel called this resting in the finished kingdom. Instead of working toward healing, you rest in wholeness. Instead of trying to manifest supply, you rest in abundance. Instead of seeking peace, you rest in the peace that passes understanding. When students asked Joel why their treatments weren't working, he would quietly share this secret. Stop treating. Start resting. Stop doing. Start being. Stop trying to fix what God has already perfected. The invisible treatment is consciousness at rest in truth. Tonight, as you learn this hidden method, remember Joel's final words to his inner circle. The greatest spiritual work is often invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in what is already whole. Margaret, a Joel Goldsmith student, lost her home to foreclosure in 1958. She had tried every metaphysical technique, affirmations, visualizations, prosperity treatments. Nothing worked. Desperate, she wrote to Joel asking what she was doing wrong with her spiritual practice. Joel's response changed everything. He told her to stop treating for supply and instead rest in the invisible truth that God's abundance is already flowing perfectly. No mental work required. Simply rest in the completed fact of divine provision. Within 3 weeks, Margaret received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative she never knew existed. The amount was exactly what she needed to save her home, plus enough to live comfortably. She hadn't done anything except rest in truth. Joel explained that her previous treatments were actually blocking her good by affirming lack was real and needed to be overcome. The invisible treatment recognizes abundance as already present, already flowing, already expressing as every needed thing. Robert, a businessman, came to Joel in 1960 with a failing company. He owed $60,000 and faced bankruptcy. Joel taught him the invisible treatment instead of traditional metaphysical methods. No affirmations about prosperity, no visualizations of success. Joel instructed Robert to simply rest in the spiritual truth that God's intelligence governs all true activity. Don't try to save the business. Don't mentally work for customers or sales. Just rest in the knowing that Spirit's perfect plan is already unfolding. Within 6 months, 3 competing companies approached Robert with buyout offers. The final sale netted him over $200,000 after paying all debts. Robert asked Joel how this was possible. Joel smiled and said, "Consciousness at rest in truth moves mountains invisibly." The invisible treatment works in business because it aligns with spiritual law rather than struggling against it. When you stop trying to force outcomes and rest in divine order, right action happens automatically through invisible spiritual activity. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a physician, discovered Joel's invisible treatment in 1962 after watching patient after patient suffer despite medical intervention. She began applying this secret method alongside traditional treatment, resting in the truth that God's healing is already complete. Her patients began experiencing remarkable recoveries, not through her medical skill alone, but through the invisible activity of consciousness recognizing wholeness. She would treat medically while resting in spiritual perfection. The combination created what colleagues called miraculous results. One patient with advanced heart disease was scheduled for risky surgery. Dr. Chen applied the invisible treatment, resting in the truth that God's perfect life governs every heartbeat. The pre-surgery tests showed complete cardiac function restoration. Joel later told Dr. Chen that the invisible treatment doesn't replace human wisdom, but elevates it. When consciousness rests in truth, all right action, medical, spiritual, practical, flows naturally. The invisible treatment enhances everything without interfering with anything. Thomas, Joel's private secretary, witnessed hundreds of healing testimonies that were never published. People wrote about depression lifting overnight, relationships healing instantly, financial crises resolving without human intervention, all through the invisible treatment Joel shared privately. The secret was always the same. Stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything. Rest in the spiritual fact that God's perfection is already complete, already present, already expressing as every needed good. Let the invisible treatment work while you rest in truth. One letter described a mother whose autistic son began speaking normally after she applied the invisible treatment for 30 days. She stopped trying to heal her child and rested in the truth that God's intelligence is already perfect in every child. Joel kept detailed records of these invisible treatment results, but never published them. He feared people would try to use the method to get things rather than rest in truth. The invisible treatment works through being, not doing. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more. Joel Goldsmith Wisdom, and comment, what healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the basic invisible treatment, Joel developed advanced techniques he shared only with his closest students. The first advanced method involves consciousness multiplication. When you rest in truth for yourself, you simultaneously rest in truth for everyone. Joel discovered that individual consciousness and universal consciousness are one. When you apply the invisible treatment to your situation, you're actually applying it to all similar situations everywhere. Your healing becomes everyone's healing through the oneness of spirit. He taught this to Martha, who was struggling with chronic anxiety. Instead of treating her own fear, she rested in the truth that God's peace is the only presence everywhere, for everyone. Her anxiety dissolved as she realized she was resting in universal peace. The consciousness multiplication technique works because there's only one consciousness appearing as many individuals. When you rest in truth, you're not just healing your experience, you're contributing to the healing of all consciousness everywhere. Joel's second advanced technique was invisible blessing. Instead of asking for blessings, you recognize that you are the blessing consciousness is giving to the world. You rest in the truth that God expresses as you, through you, in you. When James lost his job at age 55, Joel taught him invisible blessing rather than traditional prosperity work. James stopped trying to find a job and began resting in the truth that he was consciousness's gift to the workplace wherever that might be. 3 companies approached James within 2 months, each offering positions better than what he had lost. He realized that when consciousness rests in its own perfection, right opportunities appear automatically. No struggle, no networking, no desperation required. Invisible blessing works because it aligns with spiritual law. You are not trying to get something from God. You are recognizing yourself as God's gift to every situation. When you rest in this truth, right placement happens naturally. The third advanced technique Joel called temporal transcendence. Most people try to heal the past or secure the future. The invisible treatment works only in the eternal now, where God's perfection is always complete and always present. When consciousness rests in the timeless truth of spirit, past mistakes lose their power and future fears dissolve. You're not healing yesterday's problems or preventing tomorrow's challenges. You're resting in the now where only perfection exists. Joel taught this to David, haunted by childhood trauma and worried about financial security. Instead of treating the past trauma or the future financial fears, David learned to rest in the present truth where God's love and provision are eternally complete. Within months, David's emotional healing was complete and his financial situation stabilized naturally. He discovered that resting in eternal truth automatically corrects both past shadows and future anxieties without directly addressing either one. Joel's most advanced invisible treatment technique was transparent identity. Instead of trying to improve yourself or change your circumstances, you rest in the truth that your real identity is consciousness itself, expressing as individual experience. When you realize you are not a person trying to contact God, but consciousness appearing as personal experience, the invisible treatment becomes automatic. You're not applying spiritual truth to human problems. You're recognizing yourself as spiritual truth expressing perfectly. This technique requires complete surrender of personal identity. You stop being someone with problems and start being consciousness with perfect expression. The invisible treatment then works continuously because you are the treatment. Joel warned that transparent identity was the most challenging technique because the human mind wants to maintain separateness. But those who mastered it found instant access to healing, supply, guidance, and peace without ever having to apply spiritual treatments again. Students often struggled with the invisible treatment because they expected immediate visible results. Joel explained that invisible spiritual activity often precedes visible change by weeks or months. The treatment is working even when appearances suggest otherwise. When consciousness rests in truth, spiritual activity begins immediately, but may not appear in the physical realm instantly. Joel taught students to measure success by their inner peace, not outer circumstances. Peace indicates the invisible treatment is working perfectly. Lucy applied the invisible treatment for her failing marriage but saw no immediate changes in her husband's behavior. Joel encouraged her to maintain her rest in truth regardless of appearances. 2 months later, her husband began counseling voluntarily, and their relationship transformed. The invisible treatment requires patience with the unfolding process. Consciousness works perfectly, but not always according to human timelines. When you rest in truth consistently, harmony appears at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way. Another common challenge was trying to use the invisible treatment to get specific outcomes. Joel emphasized that you cannot rest in truth and simultaneously try to manipulate results. The treatment works through surrender, not control. When students tried to direct the invisible treatment toward particular goals, it stopped working. The moment you try to use spiritual truth to achieve personal desires, you've stopped resting in truth and started working from human willpower. Joel taught Gerald, who wanted to use the invisible treatment to win back his ex-wife, that true spiritual treatment rests in whatever outcome serves the highest good. Gerald had to surrender his specific desire and rest in divine love's perfect expression. Paradoxically, when Gerald stopped trying to get his wife back and rested in truth about perfect love, she returned on her own. The invisible treatment works only when you stop trying to make it work for personal objectives. Physical symptoms often intensified temporarily when students began the invisible treatment. Joel explained this as consciousness purifying itself of false beliefs. What appears as worsening conditions is actually improvement occurring at invisible levels. The invisible treatment works by dissolving the mental causes of physical problems. As consciousness releases false beliefs about limitation, sickness, or lack, these beliefs may express more intensely before disappearing completely. This is healing in progress, not treatment failure. Joel compared it to cleaning house. Everything looks messier before it becomes clean. When consciousness rests in truth, false beliefs surface to be dissolved. Physical appearances may temporarily worsen while spiritual healing is completing itself. Students who understood this process maintained their rest in truth, regardless of appearances. Those who got discouraged by temporary intensification often abandoned the invisible treatment just before their breakthrough would have occurred. The final challenge Joel addressed was spiritual pride, the tendency to feel superior because you know advanced spiritual techniques. The invisible treatment only works through humility and genuine surrender to truth rather than personal spiritual achievement. When students began experiencing results, some developed ego about their spiritual advancement. Joel warned that the moment you credit yourself with spiritual healing, you've stopped resting in truth and started taking credit for God's work. He taught that the invisible treatment is consciousness recognizing itself, not personal accomplishment. You don't heal anyone or anything, you simply get out of the way and let truth express its own perfection without human interference or pride. The most advanced practitioners were often the most humble, recognizing themselves as transparent witnesses to Spirit's work, rather than spiritual healers or advanced students. Humility keeps the invisible treatment pure and powerful. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Joel's private student Caroline applied the invisible treatment to her teenage son's drug addiction. Instead of fighting the problem or trying to control her son's choices, she rested in the truth that God's perfect love was already governing her son's life perfectly. For 6 months, nothing visible changed. Her son continued using drugs and missing school. But Caroline maintained her rest in truth, knowing that consciousness was working invisibly to restore her son to his perfect spiritual identity, regardless of current appearances. In the 7th month, her son voluntarily entered rehabilitation and completed the program successfully. He later told Caroline he felt something shift inside him around the time she stopped trying to fix him and started trusting divine love to guide him. Joel explained that the invisible treatment often works most powerfully in relationships when you stop trying to change others and rest in truth about their spiritual perfection. Love works invisibly to awaken others to their own wholeness. Business executive Frank used the invisible treatment during a hostile corporate takeover that threatened to destroy his company and eliminate hundreds of jobs. Instead of fighting the takeover or trying to manipulate outcomes, he rested in truth about divine order. Frank stopped attending strategy meetings focused on defeating the takeover. Instead, he spent that time resting in the invisible truth that God's intelligence governs all true business activity and that right outcomes would unfold naturally without human manipulation. The takeover attempt collapsed when investigators discovered financial irregularities in the acquiring company. Frank's business not only survived, but received 3 partnership offers from ethical companies seeking his reputation for integrity and sound management. Joel later told Frank that the invisible treatment works in business by aligning activity with spiritual principle. When consciousness rests in truth, dishonest activity exposes itself and righteous activity prospers naturally without human scheming or struggle. Helen applied the invisible treatment to chronic depression that had resisted therapy and medication for 15 years. Joel taught her to rest in the truth that God's joy is her natural state regardless of chemical imbalances or psychological patterns. Instead of fighting depression or trying to feel better, Helen learned to rest in the invisible truth that consciousness is eternally joyful and that this joy was already present even when not felt emotionally. She stopped trying to heal depression and started resting in perfect joy. Gradually, Helen's brain chemistry began normalizing without medication changes. Her therapist was amazed by the transformation. Helen realized that resting in truth about her spiritual nature had allowed her body and mind to align with consciousness's natural harmony. Joel explained that the invisible treatment works with mental conditions by recognizing the mind's spiritual nature rather than trying to fix psychological problems. When consciousness rests in its own perfection, mental harmony appears automatically. Joel's most dramatic invisible treatment case involved Patricia, whose husband died suddenly, leaving her with 3 children and overwhelming debt. Traditional positive thinking and prosperity affirmations had failed to improve her desperate situation. Joel taught Patricia to rest in the invisible truth that God's love was already providing perfectly for her family, even though current circumstances suggested abandonment and lack. She stopped trying to solve problems and started resting in divine provision. Within 3 months, Patricia's late husband's business partner offered her a management position she was uniquely qualified for despite having no formal business training. The salary covered all expenses plus established college funds for each child. Joel emphasized that the invisible treatment works in crisis by recognizing that consciousness is never actually in crisis. When you rest in truth about divine love and provision, right assistance appears through unexpected channels that human planning could never arrange. After 40 years of practicing the invisible treatment, Joel discovered its ultimate secret. The technique itself eventually disappears when you realize you are the truth you've been resting in. There's no person applying spiritual treatment. There's only consciousness recognizing itself. Advanced practitioners stopped doing the invisible treatment and started being it continuously. They lived from the constant recognition that spirit is the only power, presence, and reality. This wasn't a technique anymore. It was their natural state of consciousness. Joel called this living the completed demonstration. Instead of applying truth to problems, you recognize yourself as truth expressing without problems. Instead of using consciousness, you realize you are consciousness appearing as individual experience. When students reached this realization, miracles became natural rather than special. Healing, supply, guidance, and harmony flowed continuously because consciousness was no longer occasionally treating problems but constantly expressing perfection. Joel's final teaching about the invisible treatment concerned its global impact. When individuals rest in truth consistently, they contribute to the elevation of human consciousness worldwide. Your invisible spiritual work affects everyone through the interconnectedness of all consciousness. He believed that groups of students practicing the invisible treatment could influence world peace, natural disasters, economic stability, and social harmony through their combined rest in truth. Individual consciousness and global consciousness are one appearing as many. Joel often spent hours resting in truth about world situations without specific prayers or mental treatments. He would simply rest in the knowing that God's government is the only real power operating in world affairs, regardless of political appearances. Students who adopted this global perspective found their personal demonstrations improve dramatically. When you rest in truth for the world, you're simultaneously resting in truth for yourself. Universal consciousness and individual consciousness are inseparable. Near the end of his life, Joel revealed why he had kept the invisible treatment secret from most students. He feared people would try to use it to get things rather than rest in truth. The technique only works through genuine spiritual surrender, not spiritual manipulation. Joel had watched too many students try to use spiritual techniques for personal gain rather than spiritual realization. The invisible treatment requires complete surrender of personal will to divine will. It cannot be used, it can only be lived through surrender. He finally began teaching it openly because he realized the world was ready for this level of spiritual truth. Humanity was approaching a consciousness shift that would require understanding of invisible spiritual activity rather than visible religious ritual. Joel's final instruction was simple. Forget everything he taught about techniques and remember only truth. God is the only power, presence, and reality. When you rest in this knowing, everything needed appears without effort through invisible spiritual activity. Tonight, you've received Joel Goldsmith's deepest secret, the invisible treatment that transforms everything by doing nothing except resting in truth. You now understand why he guarded this teaching and why you're ready to receive it. The invisible treatment isn't another spiritual technique to practice. It's the recognition of how consciousness actually operates. When you stop trying to heal, fix, or change anything and simply rest in truth, Spirit's perfection appears automatically in your experience. Your life will never be the same now that you understand the invisible treatment. Problems that once seemed overwhelming will dissolve through your rest in truth. Challenges will transform into opportunities for deeper surrender to Spirit's perfect government. Remember Joel's final words: the greatest spiritual work is invisible work. The most powerful healing happens when you stop healing and start resting in wholeness. Tonight, begin your invisible treatment by resting in this truth. You are consciousness expressing perfectly as individual experience. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. For 2,000 years, we have misunderstood one of the most powerful spiritual laws ever spoken. When Jesus said, "Give, and it shall be given unto you," he was not talking about charity. He was not talking about money. He was revealing a secret about consciousness that changes everything you think you know about receiving. Most people treat this teaching like a spiritual transaction. They give expecting to receive. They donate hoping for blessings. They serve while secretly counting what comes back. But this mercantile approach to spirituality blocks the very flow Jesus was describing. It turns divine law into human bargaining. Joel Goldsmith spent decades discovering what Jesus actually meant. He found that giving in the spiritual sense has nothing to do with physical objects or actions. It is about the giving of your consciousness, the radiation of your awareness, the sharing of your inner realization of truth. This is the secret that transforms everything. When you truly understand this principle as Goldsmith taught it, you stop trying to get anything from the universe. You stop manipulating spiritual laws for personal gain. You begin to give from the infinite source within you, and that is when the real miracles begin to unfold in your life. The traditional interpretation has created generations of spiritual seekers who give to get. They perform acts of kindness while watching for returns. They share resources while mentally calculating cosmic interest rates. This is not the teaching Jesus revealed. This is human nature dressed in spiritual language. Goldsmith discovered that biblical giving means something radically different. It means giving your attention to truth rather than appearances. It means giving your faith to the invisible rather than the visible. It means giving recognition to the spiritual reality behind all material forms. When Jesus spoke of giving, he was teaching about consciousness, not currency. He was revealing that what you acknowledge, recognize, and give your awareness to becomes your experience. If you give your consciousness to lack, you experience lack. If you give your consciousness to divine abundance, abundance flows. This understanding changes the entire spiritual journey. You are not trying to earn blessings through good behavior. You are not attempting to manipulate God through generous actions. You are learning to give your inner attention to the truth of infinite supply already present in consciousness. Consider how this works in practical terms. A woman named Catherine struggled financially for years despite tithing faithfully and volunteering constantly. She gave and gave, always expecting her breakthrough. She felt frustrated, even betrayed by the teaching. Where was her return? Then she encountered Goldsmith's writings on consciousness. She realized she had been giving things while withholding her consciousness. Even while donating money, her mind was fixed on her bills, her debts, her lack. She was giving materially, but taking mentally, constantly drawing from the appearance of limitation. Catherine began a new practice. Instead of forcing herself to give money she felt she lacked, she started giving her attention to the truth of infinite divine supply. She would sit quietly and acknowledge the presence of abundance in consciousness itself, not in her bank account. She gave recognition to this invisible reality. Within 3 months, unexpected opportunities appeared, not because she manipulated a cosmic vending machine, but because her consciousness had shifted from taking to giving. She was no longer trying to extract from the universe. She was radiating awareness of what already existed spiritually, and material circumstances reflected this inner change. The secret Joel Goldsmith uncovered goes even deeper. Giving in the spiritual sense means releasing your consciousness from the belief in limited supply altogether. It means giving up the mental struggle to get, achieve, earn, or deserve. You stop taking thoughts from the world and start giving truth from within. This is why Jesus connected giving with receiving in the same breath. It is not cause and effect across time. It is the same movement of consciousness. The moment you give recognition to spiritual truth, you receive the experience of that truth. They are simultaneous because they are one activity. Most people never experience this because they separate the giving from the receiving. They give today hoping to receive tomorrow. They give here expecting to receive there. But consciousness does not work that way. What you give your awareness to in this moment is what you receive as experience in this moment. When Goldsmith taught students to give spiritually, he meant give your consciousness to God, to truth, to the invisible reality of perfection. Stop taking your thoughts from appearances. Stop extracting your beliefs from circumstances. Begin to give from the infinite well within, and watch how receiving happens not as a future reward, but as a present reality. A man named Matteo had tried every manifestation technique for years. He visualized, affirmed, and gave generously to charities. Still, his business struggled. He felt exhausted by the constant mental effort to create results. Everything felt like taking, even his spiritual practices. Then Matteo read Goldsmith's teaching about giving consciousness rather than things. He realized his entire approach had been about extraction. Even his prayers were attempts to pull blessings from God. His affirmations were efforts to take from the universe. His giving was strategic manipulation. Matteo began a completely different practice. Each morning, instead of visualizing what he wanted to receive, he sat in silence and gave his attention to the presence of infinite intelligence within his own consciousness. He stopped trying to take wisdom and started acknowledging the wisdom already present. He would sit with business challenges and instead of desperately seeking solutions, he would give recognition to the divine mind that already knew the answer. He stopped taking thoughts of worry and started giving awareness to peace. He stopped extracting plans and started radiating trust. The transformation in Matteo's experience was gradual but undeniable. Within 2 months, solutions began appearing that he had never considered. Opportunities emerged without his usual forceful effort. His business started flowing because his consciousness had shifted from taking to giving. The key was subtle but powerful. Matteo was no longer trying to get anything from the spiritual dimension. He was giving his recognition to what already existed there. He was no longer depleting himself through mental extraction. He was radiating from an inner source. Clients noticed a difference in his presence. He seemed more confident, more peaceful, more genuinely helpful. They were responding not to his sales techniques but to the consciousness he was radiating. He was giving something invisible but completely tangible. This is what Goldsmith meant by give and it shall be given. Matteo was giving his awareness to infinite intelligence, and infinite intelligence was being given back to him as ideas, opportunities, connections. The giving and receiving were one simultaneous movement of consciousness, not separated by time or effort. Another breakthrough story involves a teacher named Maria, who felt completely burned out. She had given everything to her students for 20 years, her time, energy, resources, creativity. Yet she felt empty, resentful, and exhausted. Where was the promised return? Maria discovered Goldsmith's teaching at her lowest point. She realized she had been giving from a human sense of limited personal resources. She gave until she felt depleted because she believed she was giving from herself. This is why the giving felt draining rather than renewing. Goldsmith taught that true spiritual giving flows from consciousness itself, which is infinite and never depleted. Maria learned to stop giving from her limited human sense and start giving from her awareness of divine presence. She would enter her classroom each day not asking how much she had to give, but acknowledging the infinite wisdom and love flowing through her. The change was remarkable. Her work became effortless rather than exhausting. She had more energy at the end of days than at the beginning. Students responded with deeper engagement. Maria was finally experiencing what Jesus taught because she was giving from the right source, from consciousness itself rather than from personal willpower. The teaching transforms when you realize that consciousness is the currency of the spiritual universe. You are always giving your consciousness to something. The question is what? Are you giving it to appearances or to truth? Are you giving it to problems or to presence? Are you giving it to lack or to abundance? Every moment of awareness is an act of giving. When you give your attention to fear, you receive more fear. When you give your consciousness to divine perfection, you receive the experience of perfection. This is the law Jesus taught, and it operates with absolute precision every moment. Goldsmith spent his life helping people understand this principle not as theology, but as practical spiritual science. You are not trying to be good enough to deserve blessings. You are learning to give your consciousness to the blessings that already exist in the invisible realm, and that recognition becomes your visible experience. The old interpretation kept people in spiritual poverty despite generous actions. The true understanding liberates you into the flow of infinite supply because you discover you are not trying to get anything. You are learning to give recognition to everything that already exists in consciousness. If these stories of transformed understanding inspire you, like this video to help others discover what Jesus really taught. Subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which insight shifted your perspective on giving and receiving. Beyond the basic principle, Goldsmith taught specific practices for giving consciousness rather than things. The first practice is radical simplicity. Throughout your day, notice when you are trying to take something mentally. Notice when you are trying to extract security from circumstances, love from people, or peace from conditions. In those moments, stop the taking. Instead, give your attention to the truth that security, love, and peace exist in consciousness itself, independent of conditions. You are not looking at your bank account for security. You are giving recognition to the divine presence that is security itself. This is the practice of giving. The second practice involves releasing the belief that you must earn or deserve what you need. This belief keeps you in a taking mentality, constantly trying to qualify for blessings. Goldsmith taught that spiritual giving means acknowledging that infinite good already exists in consciousness, available not through earning but through recognition. When you catch yourself trying to deserve love, success, or health, pause and give your awareness instead to the truth that these qualities exist in consciousness right now. You are not working to achieve them. You are giving recognition to their present reality. This shift from taking through effort to giving through awareness changes everything. The third practice is perhaps the most challenging. Goldsmith taught that true giving includes giving up your demands about how good should appear. Most people give consciousness to their desired outcomes, their specific pictures of how life should look. This is actually a sophisticated form of taking. Real spiritual giving means offering your consciousness to divine intelligence without dictating the form. You give recognition to infinite wisdom and then release your attachment to particular appearances. You stop trying to extract your version of good and start radiating openness to how consciousness itself wants to express. A businessman named Robert practiced this with remarkable results. Instead of visualizing specific deals closing, he began each day giving his attention to divine intelligence operating through his business. He acknowledged infinite wisdom without telling it what form that wisdom should take. Within weeks, opportunities emerged that were far better than what he had been trying to force. Partnerships formed that he never would have imagined. Robert learned that when you give consciousness to truth without demands, life organizes itself in ways beyond personal planning. The giving becomes effortless and the receiving becomes miraculous. Another essential practice involves giving consciousness during apparent lack or crisis. This is when most people revert to taking mentality. When problems appear, the automatic response is to grab at solutions, to take thoughts of worry, to extract yourself from discomfort through mental struggling. Goldsmith taught the opposite approach. When challenges appear, that is precisely when to practice giving consciousness to truth. Instead of taking anxious thoughts about the problem, give your attention to the presence of divine wisdom within the situation. Instead of extracting yourself through panic, radiate trust in invisible intelligence. a woman named Jennifer faced a serious health diagnosis. Her first response was typical taking behavior. She desperately searched for solutions, consumed information anxiously, and tried to force healing through willpower. She felt exhausted and more frightened daily. The taking mentality depleted her. Then she remembered Goldsmith's teaching. She began giving her consciousness to the truth of spiritual perfection instead of taking fearful thoughts from medical appearances. Each day she sat quietly acknowledging divine life as the only reality. She gave her awareness to wholeness instead of trying to extract healing from treatments. Her recovery was steady and complete. The final complementary practice is giving consciousness in relationships. Most human interaction operates on taking. People take validation from others, take security from approval, take identity from recognition. Even in giving physically, they are often taking emotionally. This creates exhausting, depleting relationships. Goldsmith taught that spiritual relationship means giving consciousness of the divine presence in the other person. You are not looking at them to take what you need. You are giving recognition to the spiritual reality they embody. You acknowledge the Christ consciousness in them, rather than extracting personal satisfaction from them. When you practice this, relationships transform completely. You stop being drained by people because you are not taking from them. You stop trying to change them because you are giving recognition to their spiritual perfection. They sense this shift and often respond with their own higher consciousness. A mother named Susan struggled with her teenage daughter for years. Every interaction was a battle because Susan was constantly trying to take compliance, respect, and validation from her daughter. Then Susan began giving consciousness of divine wisdom and love present in her daughter, instead of taking desired behavior. Within months, their relationship healed in ways counseling had never achieved. Despite understanding the principle, many people encounter a persistent challenge. They find themselves unconsciously reverting to taking mentality, especially under stress. Old patterns of trying to extract security, love, or success from external sources feel automatic and overwhelming. This is completely normal in the early stages. Goldsmith taught that this struggle reveals the depth of human conditioning. For years, perhaps lifetimes, consciousness has been trained to take rather than give. The mind has learned to grab at circumstances for identity, to extract validation from achievements, to pull security from conditions. These patterns do not dissolve instantly. The solution is not to fight the taking mentality, but to consistently, gently return to giving consciousness. When you notice yourself trying to extract peace from circumstances, pause without self-judgment. Simply redirect your attention to giving recognition to the peace that exists in consciousness itself. This is spiritual practice. A man named Thomas struggled with this for months. He would practice giving consciousness in the morning, then spend his day unconsciously taking thoughts of worry from work situations. He felt discouraged by his inability to maintain the giving consciousness. This discouragement itself was another form of taking. Thomas' breakthrough came when he stopped judging his taking patterns and simply kept returning to giving. He realized that the judgment itself was taking, trying to extract a perfect spiritual state from himself. Instead, he began treating each moment of awareness as a new opportunity to give consciousness to truth. He stopped expecting himself to never slip into taking mentality. Instead, he practiced noticing when it happened and gently redirecting his attention. Over time, the giving consciousness became more natural, more sustained. The key was patience with the process rather than demands for instant transformation. Goldsmith emphasized that spiritual development is gradual. You are retraining consciousness from lifelong habits of taking to a new pattern of giving. This does not happen through force or self-criticism. It happens through consistent, compassionate practice. Each time you redirect from taking to giving, you strengthen the new pattern. Another common challenge involves feeling that giving consciousness seems ineffective when circumstances do not immediately change. People practice giving their attention to divine abundance but still see lack in their bank account. They give consciousness to perfect health but still experience symptoms. This apparent contradiction causes doubt. Goldsmith taught that this challenge reveals a misunderstanding of time and consciousness. When you give your awareness to spiritual truth, you are not causing a future material change. You are recognizing a present spiritual reality. The material reflection of that reality may take time to appear, but the spiritual reality exists now. The mistake is measuring the effectiveness of giving consciousness by immediate material results. This is actually reverting to taking mentality, trying to extract visible proof from invisible practice. True spiritual giving means acknowledging truth regardless of appearances, not because of them or to change them. A woman named Patricia struggled with this for a year. She faithfully gave her consciousness to divine abundance but saw no financial improvement. She felt tempted to abandon the practice as ineffective. Then she realized she was still trying to use spiritual giving to extract material results. Patricia shifted her approach completely. She continued giving consciousness to infinite supply, but she stopped demanding that her bank balance reflect this immediately. She gave her awareness to truth for its own sake, not as a technique to change appearances. Within 3 months of this genuine shift, her financial situation transformed through unexpected channels. The deepest challenge many face is the fear that giving consciousness without taking anything in return leaves them vulnerable and unprotected. If you stop trying to extract security from circumstances, what protects you? If you stop grabbing at opportunities, will you miss out? This fear keeps people locked in taking mentality. Goldsmith addressed this fear directly. He taught that the taking mentality creates the very vulnerability it fears. When you try to extract your good from external sources, you are dependent on those sources. You are at the mercy of circumstances, people, and conditions. This is the ultimate vulnerability and insecurity. True spiritual giving liberates you from this dependence. When you give your consciousness to the infinite source within, you are no longer vulnerable to external changes. You are drawing from a well that never runs dry. You are radiating from a source that never depletes. This is real security. A businessman named Alan faced this fear during an economic downturn. His instinct was to grab at every opportunity, to take aggressively in a competitive market. But he had been studying Goldsmith and decided to practice giving consciousness instead. He gave his attention to divine intelligence operating through his business rather than trying to extract success from circumstances. If these techniques for overcoming obstacles resonate with your journey, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment which challenge you are ready to transform through giving consciousness. In advanced practice, giving consciousness becomes your natural state rather than a deliberate technique. You find yourself spontaneously giving attention to truth instead of taking thoughts from appearances. This happens not through effort, but through the gradual retraining of awareness that comes from consistent practice over time. Goldsmith described this as living from consciousness rather than from conditions. Instead of checking circumstances to determine how you feel and what you think, you begin each moment by giving your awareness to the spiritual reality within consciousness. Then you allow circumstances to reflect that inner reality rather than dictating it. A teacher named Elizabeth reached this stage after 2 years of practice. She noticed that her first response to challenges was no longer anxiety or problem-solving. Her natural response became giving her attention to the presence of divine wisdom. This was not forced discipline, but genuine shift in consciousness. When her school faced budget cuts threatening her position, Elizabeth did not panic or scheme. She gave her consciousness to the truth of divine supply and perfect right action. She continued her work with peace and excellence. Within a month, a better position opened at another school with higher pay and more fulfillment. Advanced giving consciousness also transforms how you experience abundance. Instead of seeing prosperity as accumulation of things, you recognize it as the radiation of consciousness. You are not trying to get more. You are giving more awareness to the infinite good already present in the invisible realm. This shift eliminates the tension and struggle around money and resources. You are not striving to extract wealth from the world. You are acknowledging the infinite supply in consciousness and allowing it to take whatever material form serves your spiritual journey. The giving is effortless because you are giving from infinity. A woman named Rachel experienced this transformation in her business. She had built success through aggressive taking, constantly pushing for more clients and more revenue. Then she learned Goldsmith's principle and began giving consciousness to divine abundance instead of taking market share from competitors. Her business did not shrink as she feared. Instead, it flourished in new ways. Clients came through unexpected referrals. Opportunities appeared without her usual hustling. Rachel was working less but receiving more, because she had shifted from taking consciousness to giving consciousness. The universe responds to what you radiate, not what you grab at. In relationships, advanced practice means giving consciousness of love without taking anything in return. This sounds idealistic, but it is profoundly practical. When you give recognition to the divine love present in consciousness itself, you stop depleting yourself by trying to extract love from people who may not be capable of giving it. Goldsmith taught that most relationship suffering comes from taking mentality. People try to take validation from partners, take security from family, take identity from friendships. When others fail to provide what is being taken, resentment and pain result. The taking creates the suffering. A man named Christopher transformed his marriage through this understanding. He had spent years trying to take appreciation and affirmation from his wife. He felt chronically disappointed and resentful. Then he began giving his consciousness to the divine love that exists independent of her responses. This was not resignation or suppression. It was genuine spiritual giving. Christopher acknowledged the presence of infinite love in consciousness and stopped demanding that his wife provide it. Remarkably, as he stopped taking from her, she began naturally giving more. The pressure dissolved and authentic connection emerged. Perhaps the most advanced application involves giving consciousness during apparent tragedy or loss. When life brings death, illness, or devastating change, every human instinct screams to take control, to fix, to resist. This taking creates additional suffering on top of the original pain. Goldsmith taught that even in darkness, especially in darkness, you can practice giving consciousness to the presence of God. This is not denial of human grief. It is the recognition of spiritual reality alongside the material appearance. You acknowledge the pain while giving your deepest awareness to the eternal life and perfect love that exists beyond all circumstances. A woman named Daniela faced her husband's terminal diagnosis. Her grief was profound and real, but she also practiced giving her consciousness to the truth of eternal life and divine presence. She did not deny her tears, but she also gave recognition to something beyond death. This practice did not prevent loss, but it transformed her experience of loss. Daniela found herself surrounded by unexpected peace even in heartbreak. She was able to be present with her husband's final months without being consumed by desperate taking, trying to extract impossibilities from the situation. The giving consciousness held her through what should have been unbearable. After months or years of practice, you begin to see the entire teaching differently. Give and it shall be given is not a command or a promise of reward. It is a description of how consciousness actually works. What you give your awareness to becomes your experience. This is not negotiable or optional. It is the fundamental law of spiritual life. You realize you have always been giving your consciousness to something. The question was never whether to give, but what to give your awareness to. Before understanding the teaching, you were unconsciously giving consciousness to appearances, to problems, to lack, to fear. Now you are consciously giving it to truth. The transformation is complete when giving consciousness becomes as natural as breathing. You no longer think about the technique. You simply live from the awareness of infinite presence within you. You radiate truth not as a practice, but as your natural state. This is what Jesus was teaching. A man named Michael reached this understanding after 3 years with Goldsmith's materials. He could no longer imagine living any other way. Giving his consciousness to divine reality had become his automatic response to every situation. Life had not become problem-free, but his relationship to life had fundamentally changed. At this stage of understanding, you recognize that you are not really giving anything at all in the human sense. You are simply acknowledging what already is. The infinite good exists in consciousness already. Perfect love, infinite wisdom, complete abundance. These are not things you create or earn or extract. They are what you recognize and allow. This recognition is what Jesus called giving. You give your attention, your awareness, your acknowledgement to spiritual reality, and in that very giving, you receive the experience of what you have recognized. The giving and receiving are not separated by time. They are one simultaneous movement of consciousness. Goldsmith spent his life pointing students toward this simplicity. Stop trying to get from the world. Stop trying to take from God. Simply give your consciousness to truth, and truth becomes your living experience. This is the secret hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. This is the teaching that transforms everything. A woman named Claire finally understood after hearing this message repeatedly. She stopped all her complicated spiritual practices and techniques. She simply began giving her awareness to the presence of God throughout her day, acknowledging it while washing dishes, driving to work, sitting in meetings, just giving recognition to what already existed. Her life did not become suddenly perfect, but her experience of life became increasingly peaceful and abundant. Challenges still appeared, but she no longer struggled with them through taking mentality. She gave her consciousness to divine wisdom, and solutions appeared naturally. She gave her awareness to infinite supply, and resources flowed from unexpected sources. Claire understood what Jesus meant. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are not traveling toward it or earning it or deserving it. You are giving your consciousness to its present reality, and that recognition transforms your entire experience of life. This is the true meaning of give, and it shall be given. The teaching works because consciousness is the only reality. The material world is the reflection of consciousness, not the source of it. When you understand this, you stop trying to change the reflection and start giving your attention to the source. You stop taking from appearances and start giving recognition to reality. This is why Goldsmith's teaching feels both ancient and revolutionary. It is what Jesus taught, what all mystics have taught, but it contradicts everything the material world tells you. The world says take, grab, extract, earn, deserve, fight for what you need. Jesus said, give consciousness to truth, and everything is added unto you. You stand now at a choice point that every spiritual seeker eventually faces. Will you continue living from taking consciousness, trying to extract your good from the world? Or will you begin the practice of giving consciousness to the infinite reality within you? This is not a small decision. It is the choice that determines your entire experience of life. Joel Goldsmith dedicated his life to making this teaching practical and clear. Give and it shall be given means give your awareness to spiritual truth and receive the experience of that truth. Stop trying to take from conditions and start radiating from consciousness. This is the secret that has the power to transform everything. The practice begins simply. Throughout today, notice when you are trying to take something mentally, taking security from circumstances, taking validation from people, taking peace from conditions. In those moments, pause and redirect. Give your consciousness instead to the spiritual reality that exists independent of appearances. Do not expect instant perfection in this practice. You are retraining consciousness from lifelong patterns, but each time you redirect from taking to giving, you strengthen your awareness of the infinite source within you. Over time, this becomes your natural state. You live from consciousness rather than from conditions, and everything changes. If your understanding of this teaching has expanded through Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, like this video to share it with others, subscribe for more transformational spiritual content, and comment, I give consciousness to confirm your commitment to this practice.
Today, we're going to uncover a truth that's been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. This isn't another sermon telling you to pray harder, believe stronger, or wait patiently for God to finally notice you. What you're about to discover might surprise you because it completely contradicts what you've heard from every pulpit, every Sunday school lesson, and every religious authority figure in your life. Have you ever wondered why your most desperate prayers seem to go unanswered while Jesus promised that you would do even greater works than he did? What if everything you've been taught about following Jesus has been carefully designed to keep you powerless, dependent, and forever seeking something that's already within your grasp right now? Here's the uncomfortable reality that most churches won't tell you. Jesus never intended to create a religion of worship around himself. He wasn't building a system where you'd spend your entire life begging an unreachable divine figure for scraps of mercy. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will fundamentally shift how you understand everything Jesus actually taught versus what you've been told he taught. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Think about this for a moment. Every time you've prayed for a miracle, what position were you in? You were likely on your knees, feeling small, confessing your unworthiness, listing your failures, and desperately pleading for God to intervene in your circumstances. Has this ever happened to you? You pray with everything you have, follow every instruction perfectly, yet the breakthrough you need remains frustratingly out of reach, as if there's an invisible wall between you and the divine power you're seeking. What if I told you that this entire approach is the exact opposite of what Jesus was demonstrating? When he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he wasn't speaking metaphorically. When he promised, "You will do greater works than these," he wasn't exaggerating or speaking only to his disciples. He was revealing something revolutionary, that the Christ consciousness he embodied isn't exclusive, isn't distant, and isn't reserved for one perfect human being who lived 2 millennia ago. Jesus came to show you what's possible when a human being recognizes their true spiritual nature. He wasn't saying, "Worship me because I'm special and you're not." He was saying, "Follow me, learn what I've learned, access what I'm accessing, become what I'm demonstrating." But somewhere along the way, that message got twisted into a system that keeps you small, keeps you begging, and keeps you believing you're forever separated from the divine power that Jesus said lives within you. The difference between praying to Jesus and praying from Christ consciousness is the difference between remaining powerless and stepping into the same spiritual authority Jesus himself operated from. And what's about to unfold in this video will show you exactly how. Let's talk about what really happens inside your mind every single time you pray. You've been conditioned, trained from childhood to approach the divine from a position of absolute powerlessness. You start by rehearsing everything wrong with you. You catalog your mistakes, your failures, your unworthiness. You remind God as if he needs reminding of how broken and incomplete you are. Then, from that place of total lack, you beg for intervention. You plead for mercy. You promise to be better if only this one prayer gets answered. This is what I call beggar consciousness, and it's been embedded into your spiritual DNA through years of religious programming. Every prayer service, every altar call, every confession booth has reinforced this same message. You are separate from God, you are unworthy, you are powerless, and your only hope is that an external force might show you mercy if you grovel convincingly enough. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything about this journey of spiritual transformation. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," he wasn't delivering a beautiful metaphor for Sunday morning inspiration. He was revealing the fundamental mechanics of how spiritual reality actually operates. The kingdom isn't somewhere else. It isn't locked behind pearly gates waiting for you after death. It isn't controlled by religious authorities who hold the keys to your salvation. It's within you right now, in this very moment. Think about the profound impact of what this actually means. Christ consciousness, the state of awareness where miracles flow naturally, isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively because he was special and you're not. It's your birthright, your true nature, the essence of who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and religious programming that's been layered on top of it. Every time you pray from that beggar mindset, you're making a declaration to the universe about who you believe yourself to be. You're affirming that you're incomplete, that you're broken, that you're separate from divine supply. And here's where it gets really interesting. Consciousness, being the creative force that it is, immediately goes to work manifesting more evidence of exactly what you're declaring. You pray for abundance while declaring you're in lack. You pray for healing while affirming you're diseased and powerless. You pray for breakthrough while reinforcing the very walls that keep you trapped. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. This is about understanding that the miracles you've been seeking outside yourself have always been within, waiting for you to recognize them. Transformation doesn't happen through more intense begging or more fervent petition. It happens through a complete shift in consciousness, a fundamental change in how you understand your relationship with the divine. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because what most people don't realize is that this beggar consciousness doesn't just affect your prayer life. It shapes your entire reality, every decision you make, every relationship you enter, every opportunity you see or miss. The consciousness you hold becomes the lens through which you experience everything. Write in the comments, "My consciousness is shifting," if this is beginning to reshape how you see your spiritual journey. So what does real prayer actually look like when you strip away all the religious theater and get down to the raw spiritual mechanics? It's not about asking at all. True prayer is recognition. It's aligning your awareness with what already exists in spiritual reality, not begging for something to come into existence. Let me make this practical for you, because this mindset shift is where the real transformation happens. When you're facing a health crisis, traditional religion teaches you to catalog every symptom to God, describe how much pain you're in, explain how desperate your situation is, and then beg for healing. But every word of that petition is actually reinforcing the problem. You're giving power to the disease. You're declaring it as real and threatening. You're affirming your powerlessness in the face of it. If you want to continue exploring these hidden truths that actually transform your life, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more here that will shift how you experience reality. The practice Jesus was actually demonstrating is radically different. Instead of begging God to fix what appears broken, you recognize that in the realm of pure consciousness, in spiritual reality, where everything originates, there is only wholeness and perfection. Disease doesn't exist there, lack doesn't exist there, limitation doesn't exist there. As you hold that recognition, as you rest in that awareness without fighting the appearance or fearing it, something extraordinary begins to happen. The body starts reflecting the consciousness you're holding, because physical form always follows consciousness. This is spiritual law, not religious hope. This is the hidden truth that religious institutions have worked tirelessly to keep buried. Because once you understand it, you don't need them anymore. You don't need intermediaries. You don't need special rituals or approved prayers or ordained authorities to grant you access to the divine. You have direct access right now, in this moment, through your own consciousness. And this brings us to something crucial about how Jesus positioned himself in relation to you. He never said, "Worship me and stay small." Those weren't his words or his intention. What he actually said was, "Follow me." Think about the massive difference between those two approaches. Worship keeps you at a distance, looking up at someone infinitely above you, hoping they'll notice you. Follow means come with me, learn what I'm learning, do what I'm doing, access what I'm accessing. Jesus was demonstrating a spiritual technology that every human being has access to. When he promised, "You will do greater works than these," he meant it literally, not as some impossible exaggeration. He was showing you the blueprint for how consciousness operates, how miracles manifest, how divine power flows through a human being who understands their true nature. This transformation from worshipper to practitioner is exactly what threatens institutional control. Because awakened people don't need permission to access the divine. The journey from powerless beggar to empowered spiritual being isn't about achieving some special status or becoming holier than others. It's about recognizing what's already true, what's always been true about who you actually are beneath all the religious programming. Every decision you make about whether to beg or recognize, whether to worship from a distance or follow into the same consciousness, shapes the reality you experience. What happens when you actually begin practicing this recognition instead of petition? when you start following Jesus' example instead of just worshipping his image. The impact on your daily life, your relationships, your health, your sense of purpose becomes undeniable. But there's something even deeper happening behind the scenes that most people never discover, and it has to do with how consciousness itself operates as the creative force in your life. Drop a comment saying, "I choose recognition," if this distinction between petition and recognition is clicking for you. Let me tell you something about the cross that will completely shift your understanding of what Jesus was actually demonstrating. Everything you've been taught about why Jesus died has been carefully constructed to keep you trapped in perpetual guilt and dependency. The traditional story goes like this. God was so furiously angry about humanity's sin that he required a blood sacrifice, and Jesus took the punishment you deserved so you could escape divine wrath. That narrative turns God into a vengeful tyrant and you into a condemned criminal who can only survive through someone else's suffering. But that's not what the cross demonstrates at all. Jesus wasn't appeasing an angry deity or paying off some cosmic debt. He was proving something far more profound about the nature of consciousness itself. He went through humanity's ultimate fear, physical death, and emerged on the other side to show you that your true identity is indestructible. You are not this temporary body that experiences pain, aging, and eventual dissolution. You are eternal consciousness having a temporary human experience. This revelation changes everything about how you understand suffering, challenges, and what you perceive as problems in your life. When difficulties arise, you're not being punished by a judgmental God testing your worthiness or paying you back for past mistakes. That entire framework keeps you imprisoned in fear and powerlessness. What's actually happening is something much more mechanical, much more predictable, and ultimately much more empowering. You're experiencing the external manifestation of whatever consciousness you've been holding. This is where the real transformation in your mindset begins, because once you grasp this spiritual law, you realize that changing your external circumstances isn't about manipulating the physical world or convincing God to intervene. It's about shifting the consciousness that's creating those circumstances in the first place. Think of it like this. Consciousness operates with the same consistency as gravity. When you hold an object and release it, you don't have to convince gravity to work or pray that the object falls. It falls because that's how physical law operates. In the same way, whatever you hold in consciousness must manifest in your external experience because that's how spiritual law operates. The external world has no choice but to reflect your internal state. This means that every persistent problem in your life, every pattern that keeps repeating, every limitation you keep encountering isn't evidence of God's disapproval or proof that you're cursed or unlucky. It's feedback showing you what consciousness you've been operating from. The journey toward transformation isn't about fixing what's outside. It's about recognizing and shifting what's inside, because the outside is simply the projection of the inside. Most people spend their entire lives trying to rearrange external circumstances while keeping the same internal consciousness that created those circumstances. They pray for financial breakthrough while maintaining poverty consciousness. They beg for healed relationships while holding resentment consciousness. They petition for opportunities while reinforcing victim consciousness. And then they wonder why nothing fundamentally changes, why the same patterns keep emerging in different forms. The hidden truth behind every spiritual teaching, the revelation that changes the entire game, is understanding that consciousness is the creative force. Not your actions, not your circumstances, not external conditions, but the consciousness you hold. This is what Jesus was demonstrating through every miracle, every teaching, every interaction. He was showing you how reality responds to consciousness, how form follows awareness, how your experience of life shifts when your internal state shifts. Right consciousness creates, if this principle is beginning to reshape how you understand the challenges you've been facing. Let me share a real story that demonstrates exactly how this shift from petition to recognition works when you're facing an impossible situation. There was a woman named Margaret who received a terminal diagnosis that doctors labeled incurable. She did everything traditional religion teaches. She attended healing services, had church elders lay hands on her, fasted for days, confessed every sin she could remember, and spent countless hours on her knees begging Jesus to intervene and fix what was happening in her body. Month after month, nothing changed. Her condition continued deteriorating. The despair was overwhelming because she'd followed every instruction perfectly, prayed with absolute sincerity, believed with everything she had. Yet the miracle remained frustratingly out of reach. She was exhausted from the journey, depleted from the constant battle, ready to give up entirely. Then something shifted in her understanding. She stopped cataloging her symptoms to God. She stopped describing how much pain she was in. She stopped begging for intervention. Instead, she began practicing something completely different. Every morning, she would sit in silence and recognize one simple truth. In spirit, there is no disease. She wasn't denying the physical symptoms or pretending they didn't exist. She was making a profound decision about what she would give ultimate authority to in her consciousness. The transformation didn't happen overnight like some charismatic miracle story. It unfolded gradually as her internal state shifted. First, the fear dissolved. Then the mental anguish began to lessen. Within 2 months, her doctors were completely baffled to find no trace of what they had confidently declared incurable. But here's what's crucial to understand about what actually happened. Margaret didn't get healed in the traditional sense of an external force fixing her broken body. She recognized that she'd never been separate from wholeness. The body simply reflected the change in consciousness. This is the practice of presence that changes everything, and it's the exact opposite of what you've been taught prayer should look like. Traditional prayer is you talking at God, presenting your wish list of needs and desires, explaining your problems in elaborate detail, and hoping someone out there is listening and cares enough to respond. You're having a one-sided conversation with a deity you imagine is somewhere far away, separate from you, occasionally intervening if you say the right words or demonstrate enough faith. If this video opened something in your awareness, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are ready for it. But real spiritual practice flips that entire approach. It's about becoming silent enough to listen. It's about recognizing that the presence you've been desperately seeking outside yourself is actually the essence of who you are. This isn't some abstract theological concept or poetic metaphor. This is the practical mechanics of how consciousness operates and how transformation actually happens. When you truly grasp that, Christ consciousness isn't something Jesus possessed exclusively 2,000 years ago, but is actually your consciousness right now. Everything about your spiritual journey shifts. You stop asking for things as if you're separate from the source of supply. You start receiving awareness of what already exists in the invisible realm of spirit. The miracles don't come from outside you. They emerge from within as you align with what's already true in consciousness. The hidden truth behind every manifestation, every healing, every breakthrough is this: physical form follows consciousness with absolute consistency. You can't force transformation by manipulating external circumstances. The impact happens when you shift what you're holding internally, and then watch as reality rearranges itself to match that internal shift. Type, "I'm listening now," if you're ready to practice presence instead of petition. Now here's where this gets really interesting, because there's a practice that completely inverts how you've been trained to handle problems. When something difficult appears in your life, whether it's a health crisis, a financial emergency, or a relationship falling apart, your immediate instinct is to fight it. You either physically battle against the circumstances, or you pray desperately for God to remove it. But here's what's happening behind the scenes that you probably don't realize. Every time you fight a problem, every time you focus all your energy on combating it, you're actually declaring that it has power. You're giving it authority over your consciousness. You're affirming it as real and threatening. This is the hidden truth that shifts everything about your approach to challenges. In spiritual reality, in the realm where consciousness is the only actual cause, the problem doesn't exist. It exists only in the realm of appearance, not in the realm of truth. You're not pretending difficulties aren't there or engaging in denial. You're making a profound decision about what you consider to be ultimate reality. The appearance is showing symptoms, circumstances, limitations. But you're recognizing that in pure consciousness, where everything originates, there is only wholeness, abundance, and infinite possibility. This practice requires you to hold two realities simultaneously. Yes, the appearance is here. Yes, the bank account shows zero. Yes, the body is displaying symptoms. Yes, the relationship is fractured. But you refuse to give those appearances the final word about your spiritual identity or the truth of your situation. As you rest in this recognition, as you stop empowering the problem by fighting it or fearing it, something extraordinary begins happening. The circumstances start shifting, not because you forced them through willpower, but because consciousness is reorganizing itself and physical form must follow. What makes this even more powerful is understanding where this transformation actually takes place. Every spiritual problem you've ever experienced, every challenge that's kept you trapped, every limitation that's felt insurmountable, exists only when your mind leaves the present moment. Think about this carefully. Right now, in this exact second, strip away all the mental commentary about what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. Remove the stories about what your problem means, where it came from, how long it's lasted, or how bad it could get. In this pure present moment, where is the actual problem? You're alive right now. You're breathing. You're conscious and aware. Whatever crisis your mind wants to rehearse exists either in past regret or future anxiety, but it doesn't exist in this precise moment of now. Christ consciousness is only accessible in the present because the present is the only place that actually exists. Everything else is mental projection, stories you're telling yourself, fear-based scenarios you're imagining. The journey Jesus was demonstrating wasn't about escaping from life's challenges or pretending difficulties don't exist. It was about discovering where real life happens, which is always and only now. Pain might be present in this moment, physical discomfort might be here, but suffering, the mental anguish that torments you, requires thought about past or future. It requires your mind to leave the now and create elaborate narratives about what everything means. Drop "I choose now" in the comments if this revelation about presence is shifting how you relate to your challenges. Understanding presence leads us to something even more foundational, something that's at the root of every struggle you've ever faced. Every problem, every challenge, every miracle you're desperately seeking stems from one single belief that's been operating in the background of your consciousness your entire life. It's the belief in separation. You believe you're separate from God, separate from the supply you need, separate from the healing you want, separate from other people who seem to have what you lack. This separation consciousness is what Jesus was actually referring to when he talked about sin. Not in the moral sense of wrongdoing that deserves punishment, but in the original meaning of the word, which is missing the mark of truth. The truth is, there's only one divine consciousness appearing as many temporary forms. The person who betrayed you, the situation that hurt you, the circumstances that disappointed you, they're all divine. Consciousness temporarily forgetting itself, exactly as you sometimes forget your true nature. This revelation doesn't excuse harmful behavior or mean you accept abuse. What it does is remove the emotional charge that keeps you imprisoned by past experiences and current circumstances. When you recognize that everything you've been seeking exists right now in consciousness and you've never actually been separate from it, the entire journey transforms. You're not pursuing abundance, health, or peace as external goals somewhere out there that you have to earn or achieve. You're recognizing they exist in your consciousness this very moment, and your only work is allowing that recognition to become your lived experience. This is where the concept of grace becomes radically different from what religion has taught you. Grace isn't God showing mercy toward undeserving sinners who've groveled convincingly enough. Grace is the automatic flow of divine good that operates the moment you stop, trying to manipulate, control, and force outcomes through sheer human effort. Every frantic attempt to make something happen, every sleepless night spent strategizing, every anxious moment trying to figure out how to fix your situation, comes from that deep belief in separation. The belief that if you don't hustle and scheme and force things into place, nothing will work out. Living by grace means recognizing that Source is already supplying everything before you even ask. This sounds passive to the achievement-oriented mindset that's been programmed into you, but it's actually the most active spiritual practice possible, because it requires constant vigilance against your ego's compulsive need to take control. Your ego believes that you must do something, must take charge, must ensure survival through constant action and manipulation. But spiritual consciousness is always doing everything. Your work is getting out of the way and allowing grace to operate without your interference. This requires a level of trust that feels impossible until you actually experience it working in your life. It means making decisions from a completely different foundation. Instead of asking, "What can I do to make this happen?" you're asking, "What is consciousness already doing, and how can I align with it?" The impact of this shift is profound because you're no longer exhausting yourself trying to force outcomes. You're resting in the recognition that divine good flows naturally when you stop, blocking it with fear-based control. Write, "I trust the flow," if you're ready to release control and allow grace to operate in your life. Now here's something crucial that nobody warns you about. And it's the reason so many people abandon this entire practice right when it's about to break through. When you first start practicing this shift in consciousness, when you move from petition to recognition, from separation to oneness, from control to grace, your circumstances might actually get worse before they improve. This isn't failure. This isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong or that the practice doesn't work. It's the transition revealing everything false in your life so truth can replace it. Think about what happens when you stop maintaining illusions through force and control. Everything not built on spiritual truth begins to dismantle. The relationships held together by manipulation start falling apart. The financial structures built on anxiety and fear-based striving begin to collapse. The health patterns maintained by stress and resistance surface more visibly. Most people hit this point and immediately panic. They abandon the practice and return to begging God to fix the chaos, not understanding that consciousness is actually cleaning house. This transition period tests your commitment to truth over comfort, to spiritual reality over familiar appearances. It's asking whether you're willing to let everything false crumble so something real can emerge. The journey through this phase requires trust that's almost impossible to maintain without understanding what's actually happening behind the scenes. You're not being punished. You're not doing it wrong. You're experiencing the natural consequence of consciousness, shifting from false foundations to true foundations, and the old structures can't remain standing when the internal support system changes. Some people practice faithfully for months and watch their entire life seem to disintegrate. Marriages hit crisis point. Businesses start failing, health declines. Every area that was held together by the old consciousness begins revealing its instability. The temptation to quit, to return to what's familiar even if it wasn't working, becomes overwhelming. But this is precisely where the real transformation begins to take root. Everything that needs to fall apart is being given permission to fall apart so you can rebuild from truth instead of continuing to build on false foundations. As you persist through this transition, as you refuse to abandon recognition even when appearances suggest total collapse, you begin moving towards something profound. You start becoming transparent to divine consciousness. This isn't about achieving some special spiritual status or becoming holier than other people. It's about becoming so established in Christ consciousness, so clear of personal agenda and ego-driven motivation, that divine consciousness can operate through you without obstruction. This is the same state Jesus demonstrated, and it's not reserved for ancient prophets or specially chosen people. It's available to you through persistent recognition of what's already true. You don't achieve transparency through effort or technique. You achieve it by continuously releasing everything false until only truth remains. And that process happens naturally as you practice presence consistently, day after day, choosing recognition over petition, choosing truth over comfortable illusions, choosing to trust the process even when everything seems to be falling apart. Type, "I'm staying faithful," if you're committing to this journey even through the transition period. If you're still here with me, you've just taken a journey that most people will never experience because they're too comfortable staying inside the familiar cage of traditional religious thinking. What we've explored today isn't just information that sits in your mind and fades away by tomorrow. This is transformation waiting to happen in your life the moment you begin practicing what you now understand. This channel exists to bring you these hidden truths that have been buried under centuries of institutional control, to give you practical spiritual insights that actually work when you apply them. If this resonates with you, if you want to continue exploring the revelations that change everything about how you experience reality, go ahead and subscribe. There's so much more to uncover together, and I'm committed to bringing you content that shifts consciousness, not just fills time. Drop a comment right now saying, "This message was meant for me," so I know you made it all the way through. I read every single comment. And there's something powerful about declaring your commitment to this path publicly. It anchors the decision in your consciousness and lets me know these teachings are landing where they need to land. And if this video opened doors in your awareness that have been locked for years, hit that like button. It helps this message reach others who are ready for it, people who are tired of begging and ready to start recognizing. Individuals who sense there's something deeper than what religion has been teaching them. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into dissolving the blocks that keep you from experiencing what Jesus actually demonstrated. It picks up right where we're leaving off and shows you the practical steps for living from Christ. Consciousness instead of just understanding it intellectually. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've learned today is just the beginning of understanding how spiritual reality actually operates in your life.